Hey friend, do you want to offer meaningful learning solutions that create behavior change, fit in the flow of work, and yield real results for your nonprofit? If yes, this is the podcast for you. Join me as I explore instructional design and leadership development best practices, as well as change management, belonging, and influence. If we haven't met yet, I'm Heather, and I've been in your shoes. I'm a learning and development consultant and founder of Skill Masters Market. Before starting my business, I led learning and leadership development initiatives for a large national nonprofit. I know what it's like to need to develop your staff quickly and effectively and to build the relationships and cut through the organizational layers to be successful. And I'm bringing all of that to you in this podcast. So block your calendar, turn off your Teams or Slack chat, and let's dive in. It's learning for good.
One thing I love about the nonprofit sector is the variety of organizations that exist. There are social services organizations, healthcare organizations, credit unions, universities, associations, and more. And in this podcast episode, you're going to get a closer look at two nonprofits that on the surface look pretty different. But as we hear from these two nonprofit pros, we'll also hear so many similarities in their work. These conversations originally appeared as LinkedIn Lives, and I'm excited to bring them to you on the podcast today. We'll hear from Eric Wu, who was previously with Northwestern University, and Matt Todd of Plan International Canada. And I can't wait. Let's dive in. It's learning for good. First up, it's Eric Wu. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Career Conversation series. We are excited to have you today. We've got Eric Wu with us, and we'll get to meet him in just a few moments. We are so excited about this series. We're going to continue our nonprofit L&D Career Conversation series. It's a series that's here about monthly on LinkedIn. I started it in January just because I'm often asked questions about nonprofit learning and development. And so this was a great way to share some of those answers with the larger LinkedIn world. So I often get asked questions like, what types of learning and development roles are available in nonprofits? Or what types of nonprofits hire in learning and development? Who do they create training for? Other solutions? How big is their team? How does one find nonprofit learning and development jobs? How do you get into the sector? So I'm glad I listened to that little nudge to start these career conversations because nonprofits need our support now more than ever, and we need to shine a light on the important work that they do. So earlier this year, we spoke to Nadra Dennis, Center for Employment Opportunities, and we spoke to Dr. Jamie Hoffman of Big Brothers Big Sisters of America. And I will share links to their career conversations in the comments after we are done here today. But they both shared such interesting and inspiring stories of career growth and mentoring. And they gave us just such a unique glimpse into their organizations and how learning and development works there. And today we have Eric Wu. Eric previously worked at Northwestern University, and I know his story is going to be incredible as well. So I can't wait to get started. Thanks to those of you who are joining us live. If you are here live with us, go ahead and share with us where you are joining from. And then if you currently work for a nonprofit, let us know that too. I know we usually have a mix of people who are already working in nonprofits and they're just curious how other nonprofits do things, and people who are not yet in nonprofit but are curious about making a potential switch to nonprofit, making a little career pivot. So let us know where you're joining us from. And if you're in a nonprofit, let us know that as well. And again, welcome to the Nonprofit L&D Career Conversation series. I get questions about nonprofit L&D careers a lot. So I kicked off the series where we get to meet nonprofit L&D pros and learn more about their organizations, who they create training for, how big or small their team is, and so much more. Plus, we get to hear their unique career journey with all its twists and turns, how they ended up in nonprofit. So these events are perfect for you if you're already in nonprofit or if you're considering a pivot to nonprofit as well. All right, so today is our third career conversation, and I couldn't be more thrilled to welcome Eric to the conversation. Eric is a people-oriented organizational development leader with comprehensive experience in leadership development, talent management, program facilitation and design, business process transformation, and enterprise strategic planning. Eric has worked in complex, matrixed environments across multiple industries, driving change and results. Eric leverages human-centered design and design thinking to solve for organizational challenges and social impact initiatives. He most recently spent 4.5 years in the leadership and talent development space on the talent development team within the central HR department at Northwestern University, where he focused on building scalable talent development and performance management strategy and solutions to improve professional development and career outcomes for staff. Prior to Northwestern University, he worked as a graduate intern for Mondelez International with the Global Talent Center of Excellence. A career and industry pivoter, Eric completed his graduate studies in Northwestern in 2022, where he obtained his MS in Learning and Organizational Change and completed a graduate certificate in Designing for Organizational Effectiveness. Prior to moving into the human capital space, he spent 12.5 years in beer, working in corporate strategy, sales operations, and business transformation for Miller Brewing, Miller Coors. And at Miller Coors, he was a passionate inclusion advocate, including leading the Asian Employee Resource Group for many years. Outside of work, he is a passionate community advocate that is involved with co-chairing a community philanthropy initiative, the Asian Giving Circle, and is an active member of Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago. He also has been involved in endurance running for 8 years now, completing 5 marathons, including 2 in 2024. He and his wife, Brianna, reside in Chicago. Eric, I'm so glad you're here with me.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks for having me. And can't see everyone's faces, but looking forward to the discussion.
5 marathons and 2 in 1 year. Man, that is quite an accomplishment. That's like a total commitment. And like, I'm impressed by your discipline just to get through 1, much less 5.
Yeah, and the detail on that, there was actually 2 within 21 days as well. So I left out at that detail. So.
Oh, I don't think you can recover from 1 in 21 days. How do you recover from 2?
A lot of bed rest and a lot of just eating.
A lot of eating. Okay, I like that. I don't like the running part, but the eating part I could get on board with. If you're watching and you run a marathon, can you let us know that in the comments? I'm just so intrigued by people who can run for that long. Of course, it would take me, I would cap out. They would have to kick me off the course because I wouldn't finish on time. So that's part of it. But so impressed by the marathon running. Eric, let's dig into your career and your previous nonprofit role at Northwestern University. I'm really curious about this one. The first 2 conversations that we had were not in academia. So I'm really curious to learn more about Northwestern and what that looks like. So tell us a little bit, let's start there. Maybe tell us a little bit about Northwestern. What is the mission of the university? How is a nonprofit university different than other universities? Kind of set the stage for us there.
Great question. And like I said, that was my first time working in nonprofit and also academia. And I don't want to assume people know what Northwestern is. Like folks in the Chicago area know about it. But for those that don't know, it is a private research university situated in Evanston. So just suburb, just a couple miles north of the great city of Chicago. It is one of the founding members of the Big Ten Conference, which is now much larger than it was years ago. Its main campuses are primarily in Evanston, Chicago, the Streeterville neighborhood. We're familiar with Chicago and has some satellite offices across the U.S. as well as some global. So I never want to assume that people know, even if we've all potentially been a student of a university, maybe at a graduate level, taking a class or something. But the broader mission of universities is twofold. And like I said, sample of 1, but based on talking to people, it's pretty common. So universities are there for kind of 2 major reasons. And one would be what we call research. So everything, including knowledge creation. So Northwestern's and its university peers are their centers for research, scholarship, actively creating new knowledge and expanding existing knowledge. There's innovation. So innovation, research drives innovation in various fields. So everything from medical, social sciences, and that can lead to like new technology discoveries and solutions to broader societal challenges. And I think there's the broader thing, even for private and public universities, that is a public service. So they engage in public service, applying their research findings to address the real world problems that benefit communities. The second thing that universities are probably primarily known for is what I used to know them only for until I worked for is teaching. So think about educating students both at formal education at various levels from undergraduate to graduate, other professional programs, non-degree programs, and the broader thing of intellectual growth. They're fostering intellectual curiosity, the critical thinking, the discourse, and lifelong learning. I mean, we always hit the same thing is in our field of leadership development, we are preparing leaders. We're teaching when the faculty, other folks are supporting that, they're preparing leaders to become leaders in their fields and contribute to society. So in short, everything that's done at the university should be and usually is in service to delivering to those missions.
Hey, Learning for Good listener. I appreciate you joining me each week to get tips and tricks for nonprofit L&D pros. I love sharing my experience and bringing you top guests from the field. But I'm not the only one doing the work around here. This podcast is edited and produced by my friends at Idea Blossoms. Idea Blossoms partners with consultants and organizations who either have or want to start a podcast. They do everything from the initial podcast launch to monthly podcast management and can support you with audio and video editing, as well as content repurposing if you want to share key ideas through blogs or newsletters or social media. I'm sharing this for two reasons. One, I am so grateful for Idea Blossoms and how they help me bring episodes to you each week. But two, I know many of you have or have considered offering a podcast as part of your learning strategy. As a key contributor and sponsor of this podcast, Idea Blossoms is offering an exclusive 30% discount for Learning for Good listeners, applied to the first invoice. They have 2 spots open for 2025, so head to ideablossoms.com or email Rosa at rosa@ideablossoms.com to get started. You can find links in the show notes. And don't forget to mention the Learning for Good podcast to claim this incredible offer.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I do think, like, some part of me knows that there is research involved, but you do primarily think of them from that perspective of they're teaching students and so people go to get their college degree or additional certification or whatever. So really interesting to think about all of the different types of work that universities are really doing. And I know you were in a talent development role at Northwestern. Tell us a little more about that. What did you do in talent development? Who did you serve?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Heather. I probably should have mentioned this earlier. Just step back and just give a range of scope on like my population. So when I talk about Northwestern and higher education, sometimes we think a lot about the faculty teaching. The reality at Northwestern is there were at least, and this is not including like part-time student workers, about 8,000 employees that essentially keep up with administering the university. So keeping the university running. That was my focus when I was at Northwestern. So it's really what we call really staff focus. There's a little bit of focus on other folks like faculty when they had staff underneath them, but it was really primarily on the staff part. And I spent about 4.5 years at the university working what we call central human resources within talent development. We also were meshed into a prior iteration of being talent development well-being. Maybe the easiest way to think about it is like we had different iterations, but the part I was on is probably closest to what would be like a legacy learning and organizational development team. Within my time there, and I admittedly didn't know this till after even I left Northwestern, is that my role was a little bit of hybrid. So what I consider talent development, you go to other organizations, and I would say, like Heather and I were talking about this a little earlier, that it can mean completely different thing in different organizations. But if I think about functionally what my role had, it had a mix of, it was leadership and talent development, but also had a mix of what we call talent management and a bit of custom organizational development work. And perhaps your roles also have that encompassing. So when I talk about talent management, I'm thinking about the things that are focusing on attracting, retaining, developing employees. That could everything from onboarding, succession planning, anything to do with managing talent. My primary in talent management was 2 areas. It was managing the performance management system and the process. So the performance reviews, annual performance review cycle. And then I worked a lot with our other team, like on onboarding related things, but admittedly also, there are also a lot of other people involved in other things. And then we did a couple of other ad hoc work, which would be trying to pilot things from talent reviews, succession planning. So anything that was nascent, new talent related and talent management, I and my colleagues worked on that. Then there's probably the part you're a little folks are a little more familiar with what we call like leadership and talent development, learning development. That portion that you look at is really about empowering individuals and building capabilities at all levels. So from an individual contributor all the way to manager, senior manager, leader. And that area really is going to include anything of program design, leadership, and some level of coaching. And I'll put that in quotation marks because I don't coach in a traditional sense. But my primary focus when I was at Northwestern was designing, facilitating training programs, particularly to strengthen the first-time manager population, and also teaching others how to build and facilitate their capabilities. Then there's a lot of more ad hoc things we did in conjunction with other groups, and I was like designing and facilitating career workshop with our staff advisory council. Then more of the coaching part was more ad hoc consults and coaching to help employees with their career development. My primary area was like, I don't know if folks are Hogan certified, but I'm Hogan assessment certified. And I use that as part of on an ad hoc basis, helping other folks identify strength and potential derailers for growth. And that final third part I talked about was what we call like organizational development, which is like the catch-all piece. And if you go with the broader definition, that is really about like efficiency, culture, process, and organization. And it's typically going to involve things from change management, employee engagement, and collaboration. So my focus in that work was on custom workshops at a team level, primarily centered on Hogan leadership. And the other part was employee engagement, piloting engagement surveys, and anything like that. So a mix of all. So talent development was not all encompassing, but I didn't realize that till after the fact.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you said you were focused on staff. I assume there was some other group focused on faculty development or groups even. A lot of times we do see some kind of decentralization when it comes to training in a lot of organizations. So your focus was staff. And you mentioned that you were doing a lot more than training. And I'm really curious for those of you who are joining us, if you work in some sort of training related role, training related team, is your team focused on more than just training? I often hear this. It's really hard to narrow down titles and terms because we use them so differently across different organizations. So I say learning and development a lot, but we do have talent development, talent management, organizational development, right? There are all of these different titles of individual roles and teams that are often doing much more than just training. So I'm curious to see if that resonates with other people, if you feel like you're doing so much more than what just the word training tends to communicate. Let us know in the comments if that's resonating with you. All right, Eric, you mentioned a lot of stuff that you were working on at Northwestern, right? From onboarding, career workshops, manager development, right? There was all kinds of different projects and things, priorities that you had going. So tell us a little bit about your team there. How big was it? What was everyone's role on the team?
Yeah, and I think, Heather, you pointed out one thing that I meant to talk about earlier is that Northwestern, not different from a lot of universities and organizations, was highly decentralized. So we sat in what's called central HR, which also means that like when I was there, there are different HR human capital partners. So I was not directly necessarily interacting with 8,000 folks directly, even though the purview of that, but I was really working on the change agent, working with the embedded HR people in organizations. So like I said, the business school, the engineering school, the medical school, all had human capital HR administrators on there. And those still a very large group, but those were like my core, say, client list, we would call that. But our team was very mighty and small. Even when I parted ways, we were about a team of 5. We had pretty distinct roles. Like on paper, we often crossed over what we did. The areas that like my teammates work on, I had colleagues that primarily focus on what we call digital learning. That includes instructional design in tools like Articulate. They manage the learning management system. I don't know if anyone here uses Cornerstone, Saba, SPX, but that was our learning platform where performance, any of the LMS sat on there. My role was specifically more in the broader areas of program management, leadership development, process, and change management. We also had one colleague who I thought was a superstar. I don't know how she did it, but she was dedicated to both like the on-site and virtual support of pretty much every program, even some outside of our direct group. But think about workshops, training, registration, logistics across university. If you've ever worked in a decentralized university or organization, you'll find that getting space on site is very hard, and that involves a lot of coordination. And then the director of our group was more of the relationships within both for central HR. So we were a group in HR that was about, I want to say 90 to 100. So pretty small group relative to the size of even just central HR. And the director handled a lot of the external relationships with both within HR, but also with the distributed community. So you had a lot of kind of stakeholders to manage and to influence and potentially change minds of.
Yeah, it sounds like it is pretty complex. And to your point, when I was reading your bio, working in matrix organizations, and there's just lots of moving pieces and parts. And I find that to be true in a lot of nonprofits, but I think definitely in the academic realm, there's just a lot of pieces that are involved in making things happen. So if anybody has questions for Eric about Northwestern, anything that he shared about talent development there, the team that he was on, feel free to drop those in the comments. We will be checking for questions. We are going to transition to talk a little bit more about Eric and his particular interest in nonprofit and his career journey. So if you have questions about his team, about Northwestern, about the talent development role and the priorities that he shared, go ahead and drop those in the comments and we'll get to those. And Eric, we do have another marathon runner on with us today. So
I saw that.
All right. All right, Eric, let's talk a little bit more about you. So what drew you to nonprofit, either the sector or Northwestern in particular, or the talent development role? Why was that important to you?
That's a great question. Ms. Heather mentioned a little earlier, but I don't know if you all were on when she mentioned my bio, but I spent the first chapter of my career working in the corporate sector, specifically beer. So it was Wells Company, it was Miller, then a Miller Brewing, then eventually its successor company through mergers, Miller Coors, and now Molson Coors. Like I said, if you've had a Miller Lite, a Coors Light, a Blue Moon, or Peroni, I could go on and on. You probably had a product that my old company sold. And I probably might have influenced folks on there. In fact, actually, one of my roles there, in fact, was actually teach our salespeople how to sell beer better in retail. So it's very potential I've influenced your beverage choices at some point. But when I was in the beer industry, I think I know it really came in and it was a very purely for profit driven industry. Didn't really have a problem with that. Like I really enjoyed the majority of time I spent there. But I think after a while, I think I felt it was a tougher time to connecting to the overall outcome, not actually the mission of but outcome of what success was measured on. And really was like, in the end, what marked if it was a good or bad year was that, did you sell more beer? Did you sell more Miller Lite and Coors Light than Bud Light? And fundamentally for me, that was not something that really deeply connected. I was like, I enjoy it, but it didn't want to be the end all be all. In fact, actually, when I was at Miller, I spent a lot of my time, as Heather mentioned, leading diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives with leading employee resource group, which was important. So a lot of things about connecting about culture. Also spent a lot of time with folks in our community affairs group, really figuring out how we could integrate, reach out more to communities. When I was thinking of switching to nonprofit higher education, I think I was really trying to figure out how I could connect to work that was a little more connected at the institutional level or maybe even functional level. And to be honest, even at 4.5 years, I talk about research and teaching. I was still not quite as connected to the overall mission. I knew what Northwestern did, but I wasn't as connected at the organizational level. However, what was different than this time was I was very deeply connected with the functional role. I think about that's people-centered, being staff-obsessed, really caring about people's development. And I think I always put that as my broader North Star or your true north about what are we doing to move the needle even incrementally for the purpose of their development? So I couldn't actually focus on and connect with the broader outcome of research and teaching. I could be really connected with that broader like functional department mission.
I love that. Staff obsessed. That's good. So just you really connected with the role itself and being able to invest in people, invest in the staff. So how did you get there? You talked about you were in sales. Now you're in talent development. What was that process like, that pivot like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question as I always kind of reflect back and people ask to tell about your career story. So my first job ever was actually in management consulting for a boutique M&A advisory firm that focused on the payment space. So essentially it's a fancy way of saying I consulted and knew all the back end. So if you have a debit card, a credit card, you've ever swipe, put in the ATM, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the background. And I did that for about 2 years and going, that's even less connected to there's a lot of money to be made, a lot of money flowing in the background, no pun intended. And I didn't really connect with that. And I thought originally my whole plan was one, I really wanted to move into and work in a consumer packaged goods company because I thought it was very consumer facing. Is like your friends, they use your product on that, which is actually how I ended up at Miller Brewing and Company in Milwaukee. And actually always knew I wanted to move to Chicago. So luckily for me, my company had a merger that brought me down there. So I didn't actually need to leave because my whole grander plan was that I thought I was actually going to get my MBA. Actually, I thought I was going to go to Kellogg at Northwestern. That was my whole grand plan, work in brand management, do all those kind of things. I've actually I haven't got my MBA and I never worked in brand management and marketing. And one thing particularly as I was working in consumer packaged goods at the time is like, I got interested in everything. So I never really deeply focused just on one area. So it became really line focused. I was like, I want to be a generalist. And the reality with my company is that I capped out on my ability. Like I wasn't at the level where I could make myself like a career as being a generalist. So I'd either have to go into marketing or sales more deeply. So, and the culture really, honestly, at the last couple of years really wasn't my thing. So I said, maybe it's kind of time to part ways. And I parted ways with Miller Coors, and I thought I was going to go maybe the 180. I told you I spent time really in outside of work, volunteering, being involved with organizations. So I talked with social service agencies, foundations, everything, going, oh, you know what? I'm interested in maybe work for you. And I couldn't quite figure out what I wanted to do. And then I came back with some reflection when I was on the corporate sector and thought about that. My last 5 years, I capped out on my own personal development, my own personal and professional development. So I look back and saying, maybe I can do something that would help myself at that time not get stuck and not feel like that. So that was like what I talked about being staff obsessed and development focused is that's what the space I want to be in. That's ultimately what led me to a space of talent L&D focus, which got my grad degree. Through that was internships and also a job at Northwestern. So it was a really long winding road, which you're still writing chapters for.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of thinking back to where you were, how you felt while you were there, and now being able to help people who might be feeling the same thing or helping them avoid feeling that as well, being more proactive about it. So we get a lot of people who are interested in nonprofit L&D. They're curious. They're not really sure what it is. Maybe they would be interested in eventually working in some sort of nonprofit L&D talent development type role. And so they just want to learn more. They want to hear more about what the role was. How did you get there? That kind of thing. But what advice would you give someone who is looking to make this transition? You've made the transition. It was quite a bit different than what you were doing before. So what advice would you give to someone who is looking to transition into learning and development or pivot into the nonprofit sector?
That's a great question. As I think about maybe answering the first part, just transition to L&D, I think I always had an inkling that I want to do that work. I just didn't necessarily, like I mentioned, when I was in the beer industry, I spent about like a good year and a half in a role that was specifically telling people how to sell more beer. That was L&D. I did trainings on different tools and other things. That's L&D. So I always tell people it's not as big a stretch as you think it is. In fact, I'd actually bet if you actually go back and look at whether you do stuff you did in your day job, probably a lot in your day job, or even your volunteer work, is you've probably been doing something L&D at some point. Like a good example is like at church, I led a confirmation class. That's actually a lot of L&D in that. As a runner, I help pace people during training runs. That's actually getting people one place to the other. That's also some form of L&D, your support and everything. So I always love folks to say, when you're looking into a role, don't necessarily let someone decide for you that you can't do an L&D. Make the case for yourself. Like I said, it doesn't have to be your day job. It could be things you're doing outside of work that are really that. So it's really highlighting what your transferable skills are. So if you really enjoy communication, you enjoy facilitation, you love doing training, empathy, those are things that are always highly valuable in L&D. And you probably are doing a lot of that right now. So it's really about drawing the connections between your current role or volunteer roles that are required for that and really emphasizing how they align. So make the case for that. I would say is like for folks that are like really interested in L&D is if you're really interested, you're probably also someone that's really invested in continuous learning. So perhaps you're going to get a certification. There's a lot of free stuff. You can join conversations like this. You can talk to other folks. You can go to Coursera, edX, LinkedIn Learning, just be a voracious learner of things. Do what you're doing. What Heather's doing is great because you get to talk and connect with people. Talk with other L&D folks. Reach out LinkedIn, meetups. Those help you really understand the industry, learn about job opportunities and gain mentorship, and then craft impactful stories. So you talked about the leveraging transferable skills. that's what you're trying to show it. Highlight examples of how you coach, developed, or trained others, even if you have been in an L&D role. And then finally, it's just stay curious. I always figure that L&D is so emerging. Like it's like there's no like every day there's a kind of new thing. There's a new technology. It could be even like how you're using generative AI to as a learning partner. There's a lot of different things. So that's just staying curious and a mindset. The pivoting nonprofit sector is a really good question because I'm never sure exactly what the right answer. I knew from my end, I was always interested in doing something more. I think the way I put it out was like, I want to help others do more good. Meaning like, don't spend the time on it, make them better at leading teams, managing administrative portions so they can spend less time, make that more efficient and do the stuff they're really great at doing. But I think the purpose a little bit is clarifying the why. So reflecting on your personal motivations for joining nonprofit world. So perhaps it's mission alignment, maybe it's impact or seeking broader fulfillment. So I think nonprofit leaders appreciate when people say, that's the one thing I noticed when I was at Northwestern and we're looking at Hogan data is that people at Northwestern were really high on altruism. So that was actually significantly higher as far as like a factor on that and a value. Learn nonprofit operations by getting connected again with others. On that, you're going to understand how they differs from for-profits and the governance, funding, and decision-making. Like I said, is you run the same issues at both type of organizations. They're just structured a little differently, but people have challenges leading teams. People run into decision-making challenges. There's red tape. That's for-profit and nonprofit. But really understand in the nonprofit world, like how that might be different. If you can talk about mission-aligned skills and highlight, that's always a plus too. Volunteer or freelance. Like we always talk about, if you volunteer a lot, you can give time, talent, treasure, testimony, and ties. If you can give some time and talent and really learn and build your skill in there, you can really actually get some really interesting insights and learn how to do things already. And then that final part is really tailor the story. It's always about why. Just don't assume people know why you want to do it. Just be really apparent about it.
So much goodness in one response, Eric. I don't even know where to start, but I love that you've called out like reflecting on why you want to make a transition and then using that as you're navigating that process, doing the research, being curious, whether it's curious about nonprofit or curious about learning and development, and then also relying on the skills that you already have. I say this all the time. If you're looking to transition to learning and development, don't discount what you've already done. And there is a good chance that you have mentored someone, you've onboarded a new team member, you've done something that is learning and development related. It's a starting point, right? And you can rely on that starting point and you can continue to learn and grow and practice. And then that will help you make that transition into learning and development.
Yeah. Heather, I remember a post you made a little early on when we first connected that like saying, hey, who learns instructional design? There's not a lot of people that are formally trained it. You end up doing it. You've read it a job aid, done any type of training. You've probably done some level of instructional design. You haven't known it. It's just fancy. It's a fancy word. Most people really haven't gone through I've not really gone through technical. I learned by doing too. So you've probably done it already.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with getting a degree in adult learning. There's nothing wrong with certifications. There's nothing wrong with continuous learning. Those are good things, but it's not necessarily a requirement or a first step, because you do likely already have some experience creating training or helping solve performance problems, the things that we're actually doing in learning and development. So good. So good, Eric. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing more about your work, your career journey, and giving us a little insight into nonprofit higher education.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And for those of you who are joining us, if you are currently in nonprofit and you are just curious about what other nonprofits look like, come join us inside the Nonprofit L&D Collective. We get to have conversations like this all the time, get insights into what other nonprofits are doing. And it's a great network of nonprofit learning and development pros. We also have another career conversation coming up in May. We're going to hear from Matt Todd of Plan International Canada. This was rescheduled from March. So we'll do that May 22nd. It'll also be Same time as this one, 11:15 Central Time. So I'll be sharing a link to that one soon, and I'll add that in the comments so you guys can jump on over and register for that one if you're curious to hear from another nonprofit L&D pro about another nonprofit organization. We'll also link to past career conversations in the comments as well. So if you want to check out any of the conversations we've had in the past and hear their career journeys and learn more about their organizations, you can do that as well. But thanks everybody for jumping on with us today, and we'll see you next time. Eric, thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
I loved hearing Eric's story and how he transitioned to L&D with some intentionality and really kind of fell into this nonprofit sector.
Do you wish you could connect with other nonprofit learning and development leaders? I know what it feels like to want someone to bounce ideas off of and to learn from, someone who really understands you and your work. Imagine if you could have a simple way to meet people in the field, ask questions, and share information. That's why I created the Nonprofit Learning and Development Collective, where nonprofit L&D, talent management, and DEI leaders can connect with each other quickly and easily in a virtual space. When you join this community, you will walk away with a new, diverse, and powerful network and a sounding board for your staff development needs. So if you're ready to exchange ideas and collaborate with your peers, come join the Nonprofit L&D Collective.
Now I want us to hear from Matt Todd of Plan International Canada. Matt's career journey is a bit different as he knew he wanted something with greater purpose. Let's hear what Matt has to say. All right, we are live for our fourth career conversation of the year. And I could not be more thrilled to welcome Matt Todd to the conversation. We will learn a little bit more about Matt here in a little bit, but just excited to be here with you all, excited to have Matt with me as well, and can't wait to jump in. So if you are new to the Career Conversation series, we are talking with people in nonprofit training-related roles like learning and development, talent development, workforce development, and more. And these conversations give us an inside look at what different nonprofits do, who they serve, who they create training and other performance solutions for, and how big their L&D team is, which is great for those of you who are in nonprofits and wanting to benchmark or learn about how other organizations are structuring their L&D efforts. It's a great opportunity for you. And if you are with a nonprofit, if you're joining us live and you are with a nonprofit, we would love to hear which nonprofit you are with. We also spend time during these conversations just getting to know our guests and hearing about their career journey. It's really a straightforward cast to L&D and to nonprofits. So Matt, you might be our exception. We'll have to wait and see. And so this is also great for those who are looking to transition into the sector. I started this series because as a nonprofit learning and development consultant, I often get questions about nonprofit L&D jobs, like what types of roles are actually available in nonprofits and what types of nonprofits actually hire these types of roles. Who are they creating training for? How big is their L&D team? And how does one even find a nonprofit L&D job? And if you find it, how do you actually get into the sector? And so this series gives us a firsthand glimpse into those answers as well. So thank you to those of you who are joining us live and those who will watch the recording later or even catch the podcast episode in a few weeks when it goes live on Learning for Good. We are excited you are here, and I can't wait for you to meet Matt. All right, Matt Todd is a purpose-driven learning and development leader with nearly 2 decades of global experience, empowering individuals and organizations to thrive. As Director of Learning and Organizational Development at Plan International Canada, Matt champions sustainable, high-performance, and inclusive leadership, helping teams unlock their full potential. His work has impacted over 100,000 people worldwide, from youth and educators to professionals, through transformative learning experiences. Matt brings a deep belief in human potential and a passion for creating meaningful change in the workplace and beyond. Matt, welcome.
Hey, Heather. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Hey, everyone.
I'm excited about this. So, Matt, I did mention that you're from Plan International Canada. So you're joining us from Canada. For those of you who are joining us live, we always like to hear where you're from too. We tend to have global audiences, which is really fun. So we'd love to hear if you're joining us live, type in the comments where you're joining us from. And while you're doing that, Matt, let's dig in a little bit to your career and your nonprofit role. So
absolutely.
Let's start with Plan International Canada. I think it's good to just have the context. There are such a variety of different nonprofit organizations, what they're trying to accomplish. All of those things look so different in different organizations. So talk to us about Plan International Canada. What is your mission there? Who do you serve?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am part of Plan International Canada. We are part of a broader organization. We're a global organization that is dedicated to advancing children's rights and equality for girls. We often think of ourselves not just as a nonprofit, but also social impact. I think there's a shift in terms of how we talk about these things. So, a social impact organization. And what that means for us is we stand with children, especially girls, wherever they are oppressed, or exploited, or left behind, or just not equally valued. And as an organization, we are filled with determined optimism. So we are filled with people and teams who won't stop until we are all equal. So big focus on humanitarian and emergency response work, development work, and a primary focus on children and girls' equality.
Thank you for that. And you're based in Canada. You have a global footprint. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we're part of a larger federation, which means that we have both national and country offices all over the world. And so we're the Canada-based national office.
All right. So with all of that in mind, we know that you are in a learning and organizational development role there. Tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, so I serve as Director of Learning and Organizational Development here at International Canada. Basically, what that means is I get to focus on helping people grow, both professionally and personally. So here at Plan, that could mean anything from creating opportunities for our teams to be building skills, knowledge, mindset, the things that they need and require in order to have the biggest impact in the work that they do. As part of a small team right now, we design and deliver everything from leadership development programs to workshops, supporting a DEI committee. We have continuous performance management, onboarding and orientation, and something that I'm really passionate about, we've really focused in on over the past few years, which is well-being and sustainable high performance.
So it sounds like your hands are in a lot. What modalities do you typically use to reach people? You have leadership development, you have workshops, you have onboarding. Is this typically in person? Is it virtual? Is it some combination? What does that look like?
It's a bit of everything. It's looking at what is the best way to engage with our staff and with our teams. We try wherever possible to stay away from a hybrid approach. Our experience has been that hybrid does not often work as well as either doing fully in person or fully virtual. I think like a lot of us, we became really good at doing virtual workshops and facilitation over the pandemic because we had to. So understanding what is best for people, but also what is the best modality to get the outcome we want to achieve. Something that is really important for us is fostering a culture of continuous learning because we know, as our people grow, our impact grows. And so some of what we do is in person. Our orientation program, for example, we typically do a 2 to 3 day in-person intensive, and then we continue the learning virtually over the course of another couple of months. With our leadership development program, which we had been running for 2 years, we would have in-person workshops, but then there would be virtual components to that in between those in-person workshops. So it's really looking at what is the best and most effective way. The one thing I'll say is part of what we want to do is really help build relationships and connect people. Then we try to bring them in person, even if it's just for the kickoff of something.
I love that. I love your focus on relationships there. I have found personally relationships to be an essential part of a follow through for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, for the culture that you're trying to build, for the person's career path in general, because they're making connections across the organization in a lot of cases. So I love your intentionality there. So as you're talking, it sounds like a lot of this is for staff. Is everything you create for staff? Do you create for other audiences as well?
So internally, we look at staff at the individual level. We also look at teams. We have a talent and culture team really have this focus of being internal consultants. So we look and determine how do we support individuals, whether that's around professional development or mentorship or skill building. Then also how do we support teams, whether that's change management, there's team building components. Recently, I just did a 2-day retreat with one of our internal teams around their strategy. And then we will look at wide experiences as well. Wide experiences tend to be either focused around culture or, it's things like performance management, which touches and interacts with everyone. Myself personally, I have the opportunity from time to time to be doing some external facilitation, design, and speaking. So I do that from time to time as well.
So that's really helpful context. I know with some of our guests, they've been creating training for staff. Some it's their volunteers. Some it's customer base, for lack of a better word. So it's really interesting to hear how different teams are set up. Obviously, yours being a learning and organizational development role, it makes a lot of sense that you're looking at individual, at teams, and then org-wide as well, kind of as your primary audiences. So if anybody has questions about anything that Matt has shared so far, feel free to drop those in the comment section. We are monitoring the chat for any questions that you have. If any of this is resonating, if those of you who are with nonprofits are, yes, that's what we do too. We love that feedback as well. Matt, tell us a little bit about your team there. So you've talked to us about the types of training that you're creating, who you're creating it for. How big or small is your team, and what is everyone's role on the team?
Yeah, I know we were touching base on this just before, but it fluctuates. And I think that's pretty common within nonprofit. So my team in size has fluctuated over the past few years. I'll say that when I started in this role 7 years ago, it was just me, the director of learning and organizational development. Slowly over time, and part of that I think is building a case for the work that we're doing. The organization starting to understand and see the value of having a learning function and an OD function as well. Over the last 7 years, my team has fluctuated, and that can be due both to external or internal factors. So we're small but mighty regardless. At its largest, I had 6 people on my team, and that was great. I was just having a conversation with my colleague, my parent. We were talking about when were we at our best? When was the moment where we just had everything we needed? And so we had a team of 6. And that was areas of learning and OD that included internal communications, ideally and often tends to be around strategy and leadership development, well-being, and SHP, and then also team leadership. So right now, there's 2 of us. So the team is shrunk, and we've got a couple of roles that we're looking at. How do we want to, what are our needs? What are the skills that we need to be able to bring onto the team to serve the organization? And what are the capabilities? We have a leadership capabilities framework that we developed, and we look at that capabilities framework to determine where are we strongest and where could we continue to strengthen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of organizations have at some point faced that kind of fluctuation of team size, and you do kind of have to be nimble. And when it comes time to rehire, think about what skills you really need and what capabilities you really need on your team. And I love that you guys have a capability model as well. We do have a question from the comment section. I will show that one on the screen. But in addition to hiring with those skills and capabilities in mind, what are you doing to ensure your L&D team invests in themselves so that they're continuing to develop those skills?
Yeah, I think it's been a really important question and something that can easily be ignored. So one of the things I make sure that I'm continuously investing in my learning, whether that's through listening to podcasts, we partner with LinkedIn Learning so that we have access to thousands and thousands of courses people can take part in. And so one is modeling it myself and communicating it. So really being and making people aware, okay, during this time, I'm going to be spending time or dedicated to learning this or sharing what you have learned with the people around you. Promoting and being a champion for that. I think that's a big part of building a culture of continuous learning. And something that I've done both in the role that I'm in now, but also in previous roles, is setting an expectation. And so what I mean by that, I'll have conversations with my team to say that I expect, that in the learning and development function, that we are dedicating time to learning and our own development. And so when we have alignment meetings, when we have our one-on-ones, that's part of the conversation is, what are you learning? What are the skills that you need to develop in order to reach the outcome or achieve what it is that we're setting out to achieve? And having that regular dialogue and communication, I think, is a really important part of promoting a culture of continuous learning.
That's great, Matt. I love that you're including it in your one-on-one conversations with your team. Some organizations, I don't know if you all do, but some organizations also have professional development dollars available, which can be a great way to make sure your team can attend conferences or workshops or other things. Is that something that you all do?
Yeah. So yes, it is. But as a nonprofit, they're not, as a nonprofit and a social impact organization. And I remember our VP of Finance talking to me about this when I first started, saying, we want to make sure that we are incredibly aware and responsible of where we are spending our money. And so we have a learning strategy, and part of that strategy talks about and looks at, we will always look internally before we go externally. And so we'll look internally, we'll look at what can you be learning or developing through our partnership with LinkedIn Learning, or through mentoring. We have a mentoring program that we run across the organization, conferences, definitely, but we also have a process. We have an application form that people need to intentionally fill out and think about not only how does it support your professional development, how does it support the goals that you have set to achieve over the course of this year, for example. And then we also hold not just them, but their people leaders accountable to that. So it is on a case-by-case basis, but we also offer, I would say, a fairly substantial in terms of resources and opportunities for learning, both internally and externally.
That's great. And I would be remiss not to add that as a nonprofit professional, you have access to the Nonprofit Learning and Development Collective as well, which is a community of people who are in similar organizations doing similar types of work. And it's a great place to bring your questions and get inside looks at other nonprofits and benchmark what you're doing and get your questions answered in real time. So I can drop the link to that in the comments as well. But that's also a great resource that is accessible for people. All right. If you have more questions, go ahead and drop those in the comments. We are going to transition a little bit and talk, Matt, a little bit more about you. So why nonprofit? Why was this sector or this organization or this role important to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't think I fully knew when I first started on this path. I'll start by saying I think I've had a really meaningful conversations around this with people. I tend to see that we either have there are people who have a map and there are people who have a compass. And people who have a map are I know where I am, I know exactly where I want to go, and I know the direction of the path that I'm going to take to get there. I am not or was not that person. I'm more of maybe a person with a compass, which is kind of a general direction that I know I want to go. I have no idea how I'm going to get there. And I have to stop every once in a while and just double check that I'm going in the right direction. But I think what was really important to me as I left university was that there were three things at that time. It was, I did my undergrad in psychology. During that time in university and prior to university, I had been a camp counselor. I had been a youth support worker. I had spent a lot of time as a young person working with young people. And that was something that really fulfilled me. I took my first job out of university with a nonprofit, but it was a nonprofit sport organization. And within probably the first few months, I realized this is not exactly what I want. This is not one. So I had to step back and be what do I need to be happy right now? And it came down to three things. It was, I wanted to do work that was purposeful. That was really important, good, purposeful work. I knew that was important to me. I wanted to work with young people because I had looked back and just when I was most fulfilled was working with young people. And at the time, I really wanted to be a positive role model. And what I mean by that is is it helps hold me accountable to my own actions and behaviors. And as soon as I figured that out, I got laid off from my first job. And so I took a little bit of time and I found this organization that served young people, really focused on social justice and youth leadership. And so that was when I was like, okay, this is the direction that I want to take. Now, I've always, like I said, always worked in that area, but I didn't start out in L&D. I started as a youth speaker and a youth facilitator. So I traveled around North America for a year. I was doing workshops with young people around social justice and youth volunteerism. And I did that for a couple of years. Then I moved into a role with a company that trained around emotional intelligence and social emotional learning. But they had brought me in to say, can you take what we do and can you design it for young people? And so that was my first kind of experience with L&D because it was a learning and development company. And I served as their executive director of youth programs for about 4.5 years as kind of their nonprofit arm, their social impact arm of their organization. And then I actually got asked to come back to the organization that I had worked at as a youth speaker and start their learning and development function. No idea. I had no idea like what that meant, how I was going to do that, but I said yes. And I ended up being there for 6 years and laying the foundation for L&D within this organization. When I left there, I was invited and offered the opportunity to do the same thing here at Plan. So my good fortune is I had the opportunity, and I love it about, both my work, but also working in nonprofit, is to be able to take something that doesn't exist and to have the freedom to create it. I think that had I gone in a different direction and probably did more formal training and maybe worked in a for-profit, I would have felt a little bit more boxed in. Then I'm going to play around with it. We're going to figure it out. And nobody's going to tell us we can't do those things.
Okay, 2 things based on what you shared. The first is, I feel like we always get these little bits of wisdom that are unexpected in these career conversations. So map versus compass is standing out to me. And so I really am curious for those of you who are watching us, whether now live or later, do you view your career path with a map or a compass? That is so, so good. We had, I think the first one with Nadra Dennis. I hope I don't get this wrong, but she was looking for organizations. Are you a cardigan organization or a blazer organization, a suit organization? I can't remember the exact wording, but that was a part of her decision-making process. So I love that we get these little bits of wisdom when we have these conversations. So do you use a map or a compass when you're looking at your career? We want to know that in the comment section. But the other thing that you said was you feel like when you're in the nonprofit sector, you're not as boxed in, that you have a little bit more freedom to try things. And I found that to be true as well. When I talk to other consultants who work on the for-profit side, there's a lot of onboarding and there's a lot of compliance training. And I feel like at nonprofit, we do some of that stuff, but there's also this real desire to develop people. And because of that, I think we do get to take the edges of that box and we don't have to stick inside of them. We're able to try things. We're able to test things. It's okay if we don't have all the answers. And there is a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind, I 100% agree with that. And I think something I used to say often, and it depends on the size of your organization, you're expected to do a lot with a little. But I think that actually can be at times a real benefit. And what I mean by that is when you think about innovation, I remember hearing and listening to a podcast, and it was talking about how innovation happens within constraints and how we know at times as nonprofit and social impact, we are a shortage of constraints. But with larger for-profit organizations and companies, they often have to put constraints in place in order to have that kind of innovation. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity and it can be, you may not always see it that way. There's lots of opportunity to say, okay, how do we innovate within the constraints that we have? And that I think also plays a mindset piece of how we develop ourselves and each other in our organization.
Absolutely. That's such a great point. So you talked about how you landed at Plan International and what your role is there. There are a lot of people who are looking to transition into the nonprofit sector, and they're just really unsure what's their next step. How do they do that? What advice would you offer someone who is looking to make that transition to pivot either into L&D or into the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that it may not be for everyone, and there are lots of reasons for that. So I think first and foremost, you have to really get clear on both your why and your values. What is it that you're passionate about? Maybe that's your passion for learning. I'm passionate about learning, but I'm also passionate about serving young people, and I'm passionate about building relationships. It could be your desire for social impact. It could be all of those things. So knowing what drives you to really help guide your path and keep it grounded, because you have an opportunity to not just decide what organization do I want to work for, but what purpose or mission do I want to serve, which is very different, I think, than perhaps working for a for-profit organization sometimes. But if you're looking to move into learning and development, I would say start looking at what are your transferable skills that you already have. So for me, for example, I had a strong background in facilitation and designing workshops, and I think that spoke and supported me in transitioning into learning and development. So, maybe you're really good at facilitating meetings, or you have a strong ability to coach your colleagues or other people, or maybe you are the person that's creating training materials. Those are all really valuable things within the context of L&D. I think something that is more valuable than it was even 5 years ago is also your ability to facilitate virtually. That I think is now a stronger skill that is needed within L&D. So there's tons of free or low-cost resources that can help you continue to develop those skills, but that's something I think would be important. And the last thing I would say, I think, is that if you're looking to pivot your career into nonprofit or social impact, it's a different pace and culture than what I think a lot of people are used to when they come from for-profit and larger for-profit. So I find it personally to be much more collaborative. It's in many ways less hierarchical. And it's also, I think, very much obviously mission and purpose driven. And we're very resource conscious. So those are all things that I think are important to consider.
Absolutely. I cannot agree more. Matt, thank you for joining us today. If anybody has additional questions, feel free to drop those in the comments. If you're watching this live or if you're watching the recording, we will certainly be monitoring those and can get those questions answered for you. If you're in nonprofit currently, like I said, I would encourage you to join the Nonprofit L&D Collective and get an inside look at other nonprofits. And you also get a great network of nonprofit L&D pros. So lots of different nonprofits represented, lots of different titles as far as learning and development, instructional design, organizational development, you name it, and just a great group. If you aren't in nonprofit, but you would like to join the sector, you can join my email list where I share nonprofit L&D jobs each week. That's a great way to see what types of jobs are being posted, what experience those organizations are looking for, and things like that. We'll also link to the past conversations that we've had if you want to check those out. This is, like I said, our 4th career conversation. So we've had really great conversations and different types of nonprofits, different types of roles, and I'm happy to post those so that you guys can check those out as well. But Matt, thank you so much for your time today.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather. Thanks, everyone. This was great. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Reach out. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. This career conversation series has been so inspirational. It's fun to get an inside look at the different nonprofits and also to get to know these nonprofit L&D pros better. If you are currently in a nonprofit, come join us inside the Nonprofit L&D Collective, where you can meet other nonprofit L&D pros and get an inside look at their organizations. I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.
Hey friend, was this episode helpful for you? Did you like what you heard? Do you want more content like this? Here are 3 things you can do. Hit subscribe. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts for your podcast app of choice. Share this episode with a colleague. This means so much to me personally. I read every review, but it also helps me learn what content you like most so I can create more of what you want. All right, turn that Teams or Slack chat back on when you're ready, and I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.